We begin with a poem by Danusha Lamaris, who lives not that far away. She lives in Santa Cruz. The poem's title is Feeding the Worms. Ever since I found out that earthworms have taste buds all over the delicate pink strings of their bodies, I pause, dropping apple peels into the compost bin. Imagine the dark, writhing ecstasy, the sweetness of apples permeating their pores. I offer beets and parsley, avocado and melon, the feathery tops of carrots. I'd always thought their lives a menial life, eyeless and hidden, almost vulgar. Though now it seems they bear a pleasure so sublime, so decadent, I want to contribute however I can. Forgetting a moment my place on the menu. Though I now live in Vermont, as my bio said, I grew up in Oregon. And last week, my family gathered there in Hood River for the interment of my mother's ashes in the cemetery where her parents and her grandparents and others in our extended family are buried. If you heard in the tone of my voice air quotes, you are correct. For the burial of my recent ancestors happened in heavy caskets with rubber gaskets to attempt an airtight seal, placed within cement vaults along a wall of a structure that we were calling a mausoleum. It's a system designed to resist and if it were possible, thwart the laws of physics and the natural processes of decomposition. Not a single worm would be harmed in the production of that activity related to death. It was a curious, to me, interplay between life and death. And to my mind, it was a form of death denial. After leaving Hood River on my way here to the joyful occasion of my nephew's wedding, which is later this afternoon at Urban Adama, I spent a few days in Northern California, in Klamath, to be precise. We were communing with the redwoods, which is another way to encounter the interplay between life and death. Certainly, that cycle of generation, degeneration, and regeneration, an encounter with much less denial and much more candor, and in fact, with beauty and a choiceless sense of awe. It was all around regeneration. It was underfoot. It was within sight, to the touch of my palm as I laid my hand on green layers of thick moss or thick layers of green moss, take your pick. It was seemingly everywhere, the fallen trees that one might mistakenly call dead, except they have become nurse logs sprouting new life, mosses of many ilk, mushroom-fruiting heads, deer fern and false lily of the valley, and sorrel, and so much beyond my naming, beyond our naming. It was sensual, a feast for the senses, including the paradoxical silence that is particular to a redwood stand. For though there may be waters trickling and wind moving, there is, if you've noticed, little bird song, because those giant trees with their tannins throughout their rough bark is unwelcoming to most insects. And without insects, the birds are less interested, and with fewer birds, it is a presence that is palpable. Perhaps you know this, but I just learned about those living legends, about those towering titans, that they can breathe or transpire as much as 500 gallons of water per day. Per day! And I learned this factum of 500 gallons from reading a pamphlet, but also I saw it with my own eyes, the steam wafting from faraway trunks as there were these diagonal sunlight shafts, making it seem that they were moving up to the heavens. This is the thing of which we are a part, this living, breathing thing, and actually breathing, not just metaphorically or poetically. This what I'm describing is the interdependent web of all existence, the true thing that we acknowledge with reverence and with humility for our own place within it, this transforming and transformative web of past, present, and future. A churning cycle of generation and degeneration and regeneration, of life, death, and even rebirth. I want us to channel our transcendentalist forebears, calling out a modern version of what we would say is fractal theology, this thing that is rooted in the wisdom that what is micro is actually macro, and what is macro is actually micro, that there is a relevance and a relationship to be found in the natural world, not because we are outside of it, but because we are part of it and it is part of us. That the patterns writ large, even in the cosmos, are also writ small in our own lives. That the broken pieces of anything whole contain within each of themselves a wholeness of their own. That the fecund life within a stand of redwoods is based on the mortality of an innumerable number of living things, some sentient, all partaking in the cycle of life and death and life again, composted and transformed. And this is something existentially relevant to each and every one of us here today. Like the redwoods, our lives will flare with the texture of possibility alongside the machinations of muck and mud, and then come to their end, our end, but not the end. For we find that our individual mortality is actually part of a great and growing wholeness that is completely choiceless, that is, at its core, utterly universalist, by which I mean it happens to us all. Another poem, this time from the Kentucky farmer Wendell Berry. It's called Enriching the Earth. To enrich the earth, I have sowed clover and grass to grow and die. I have plowed in the seeds of winter grains and of various legumes, their growth to be plowed in to enrich the earth. I have stirred into the ground the offal and the decay of the growth of past seasons, and so mended the earth and made its yield increase. All this serves the dark. I am slowly falling into the fund of things, and yet to serve the earth, not knowing what I serve, gives a wideness of delight to the air, and my days do not wholly pass. It is the mind service, for when the will fails, so do the hands, and one lives at the expense of life. After death, willing or not, the body serves, entering the earth, and so what was heaviest and most mute is at last raised up into song. That phrase, I am slowly falling into the fund of things. What a curious, generative invitation to think about death and our place among things. Our death becomes food not just for worms with those taste buds all over the delicate string of their bodies, but the fund and source from which all ongoing life emerges, with our body being of service as it enters the earth, if it is allowed to do so. There is a teaching from the late Vietnamese Zen Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh called "No Mud, No Lotus." Perhaps you're familiar with it. The meaning of it is that without the muck of life, both metaphorically and literally, there is no beauty. They are made of the same fabric, part of the same cycle. There is no false binary there. There is no one or the other. A fragrant lotus emerges from the stinky mud, and that fragrant lotus does not stay in that state, but returns to the mud, which is an amalgam of the countless generations of previous lotuses. This teaching is an invitation to remember that when our own lives are more muck than magnificent, can I get an amen on that? Anybody got a like? Yeah. There is something else happening, more than just our suffering and more than just our pain. That pain and suffering is real, but there is more. And if that muck is feeling distinctly deep, especially stinky, particularly pervasive, it can feel like it is our only habitat, our only ecosystem, and that it will last forever. But that is not the nature of things, not the nature of reality. For all things, including anxiety, or the impact of trauma, or the wounds from systemic harms, including the ways in which our bodies lose capacities due to age or illness or condition, these are all change and flux. All things are in a constant process of generation, degeneration, and regeneration, including our own struggling, including our own challenges, be they made by the world, by others, by ourselves, or some combination. So given that our lives have varying degrees of muck or mud, what if we were to accept the invitation offered by the words from this morning's chalice lighting, to turn towards death rather than to fear it, to choose laughter as a possible attitude? Towards that end, I have a joke for you. What do you do to a chemist after they die? You bury them. Thank you for laughing. Now, I doubt that that groaning kind of laughter is the laughter meant by my colleague Mark Morrison Reeve when he wrote those elegant words. But it is, however, the laughter available as part of the mortality ministry that has been a part of my larger Unitarian Universalist ministry. As Don noted in my bio, I have founded something called Date with Death Club, and it is a justice-affirming secular curriculum for exploring mortality not by ourselves, but in community and in conversation. When people come together for a Date with Death Club, be it at a public library or senior center or at the more than 24 UU congregations where it has been held in the last 3 years, they have a chance to explore mortality with less fear and more curiosity, with less euphemism and more reality, and with less conformity and more creativity. And the curriculum is free to anyone, not just clergy, not just religious educators, anyone who goes to the website to request it. It was a gift of love, a love gift that I was able to create during a sabbatical I had. Now, each of the 14 sessions ends with a joke. You can do almost anything with this curriculum, adapt it, but you cannot lose the joke, because even though mortality is a serious subject, we cannot take ourselves too seriously, and we shouldn't take the topic too solemnly, lest fear cause us to turn away. And so in that spirit, I have just one more joke for you. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards were cruising down Highway 101. Coming around a bend, they saw a magnificent bird, an eagle, in the middle of the road, and they swerved to miss the bird, but lost control of the car, and they plummeted to their death off the cliff. It is a tragic case of killing two stones with one bird. Our end is not the end. We Unitarian Universalists are generally pretty darn good at recognizing the mystery that is not only where we come from, but what happens after we die. And we individually might have speculation and theories, hopes and fears, concepts that have been handed down to us through our families or cultures, or what we have come up with ourselves. But when it comes right down to it, the muck and mud, not of this life, but of what happens after we die, is a mystery beyond our knowing. And alongside that mystery, when we take seriously the interdependent web of all existence, when we take it as real and not just as some intellectual thought or religious slogan, but as a definitive thread about the fabric of the universe, we might be able to lay down some of our fears and anxieties about death and dying. We might be able to ease ourselves into understanding that death is not the opposite of life, but one aspect of it. Now, we can turn away from this reality, burying our heads not in the sand, but in the muck. And frankly, capitalism wants us to do that with the medicalization of death and the professionalization of rituals for mourning. But we can do what would serve not only us better, but also the natural world. We can turn and face the fact of our mortality, because doing so won't bring it sooner. It just might make our lives more alive and precious, and lessen those fears about death and dying. It is not always easy, but it is possible to create a spaciousness that might live to a form of liberation, should we choose to encounter the spiritual and psychological terrain that comes when we face our mortality. In fact, we might find that wideness and delight that Wendell Berry spoke of earlier. So let us learn to live with death and to come to understand that death is not the worst of all events. Let us not fear death, but the squandering of the lives we have been miraculously given. Let us not forget our place on the menu. Let us find our way to both loving the mud and muck of our lives as much as Hosea Ballou did, perhaps finding their lessons about discovering love at the center of all. May we come to see mortality as one of the many holy habitats in the ecology of our lives. And let us remember that we are all falling into the fund of things. May opening our hearts and minds to exploring mortality, as well as opening our souls to the sun, help to gentle that fall. So be it. See to it. Amen.